The crew of the new Star Trek series features a cast of 3 lesbian performance artists, prompting Miller to retweet an ex-post calling it tragic. Well, I must admit, when I was a teenager dreaming about space lesbians, this wasn't what I had in mind.
I know I've split the fan base. Some people love it, some people hate it. People are like, what? There are no female Gemini. And I'm like, we're hundreds of years in the future, people. You don't think that we might have, I don't know, evolved?
Ladies and gentlemen, we have hit rock bottom. We have hit the absolute rock bottom. Starfleet Academy, Episode 5, is, I think, quite possibly the worst thing that I have ever watched.
Yeah, that's what we all want to do when we see Starfleet Academy.
Well, we start a new week, and with that new week, a brand new episode of Starfleet Academy. Guess what? This time, it hasn't even hit the top 10 charts over on Paramount Plus.
Eat your feelings. Swear it doesn't even taste like replicator food.
Yeah.
See? What are you doing?
No pepperoni.
The pepperoni is the whole point.
I will not eat anything that did not in a fair fight.
It doesn't even come from a real pig.
When an actress tells her critics to bring it on and then labels herself the wokest of the woke, you know the situation has spiraled completely out of control. Gina Yashere just went nuclear on Star Trek fans, and what she said has people questioning whether Starfleet Academy is actually a decent show or if she's desperately trying to deflect from some savagely honest criticisms.
And then my brother told me the history of Jem'Hadar and Klingon, and that there were no female Jem'Hadar. They were not meant to procreate. And so I was like, oh, wow. And then I saw the online discussions, and my characters pretty much split the fan base, where half of them are like, this is impossible, there are no female Gemini, and she's not addicted to white, what is happening?
This goes beyond your typical Hollywood drama, because this is an actress doubling down on controversy while her show crashes and burns in the ratings. The wildest part? She might have just made everything 10 times worse. Star Trek Starfleet Academy dropped on Paramount Plus in January 2026, and within days it became one of the most divisive pieces of television in recent memory. Critics absolutely loved it and handed out an 88% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes like it was the second coming of Deep Space Nine. But here's where it gets interesting. The audience score came in at a painful 43%. When you dig into what people are actually saying, the picture gets even uglier, because on IMDb over 15,000 viewers rated it a dismal 4.2 out of 10.
Every new episode that comes out of Star Trek Starfleet Academy, it seemingly just gets worse and worse and worse. And we know it's been a ratings disaster. The audience hates it. It's cringe. It's autistic. It's everything that modern Hollywood is, all wrapped up into one bundle. Everyone talks like they're 22-year-old from San Francisco. It's bad.
These aren't random haters either. These are Star Trek fans who've been invested in this franchise for decades, and they're calling this show an insult to everything they love. The disconnect between critics and audiences became impossible to ignore when the show's performance numbers started rolling in. Just 3 days after Episode 3 premiered, Starfleet Academy got completely obliterated in the Paramount Plus streaming charts, and we're not talking about losing to some hot new release either. The show got beaten by SpongeBob, Criminal Minds, and Mayor of Kingstown, but the most embarrassing loss was Everybody Loves Raymond, a sitcom that ended over 20 years ago. When a show about a neurotic sports writer from the early 2000s is crushing your expensive sci-fi spectacle, something has gone horribly wrong. And even worse, the free YouTube version of Episode 1 has fewer views than the takedown video from The Critical Drinker. More people wanted to watch someone criticize the show than actually watch the show itself. Conservative commentators started piling on, and outlets called it everything from woke garbage to a dumpster fire. The controversy was building, the ratings were tanking, and Paramount had to be sweating over what was happening. Instead of the show's stars laying low and letting the storm pass, Gina Yashere decided to grab a megaphone and make things infinitely more chaotic. What actually set the internet on fire in the first place, it was a perfect storm of decisions that seemed designed to infuriate longtime fans. A viral clip started circulating that showed several characters on the bridge of a Starfleet vessel, and in the middle of the scene, one character just casually pauses to put on a pair of glasses. Sounds innocent enough, except Star Trek fans immediately pointed out that in a universe with advanced medical technology that can fix vision problems problems instantly, nobody would need glasses. And it's the kind of detail that breaks immersion for people who actually care about the show's internal logic. That was just the beginning, though, because fans also noticed Captain Nala Ake, played by Holly Hunter, lounging in her captain's chair with her feet propped up like she's chilling on her couch at home in pajamas. For a franchise built on military discipline and professionalism, this felt wildly out of character, and one reviewer described it as watching your intoxicated grandma hit on the mailman. That's not the kind of comparison you want for your commanding officer. The controversy that really exploded involved Yasher's own character, because she plays Lura Thok, a half-Gem Hadar, half-Klingon instructor at the Academy. Here's the problem with that. In established Star Trek lore, the Gem Hadar are a genetically engineered warrior race created by the founders of the Dominion, and they were specifically designed not to reproduce naturally because they're bred in cloning facilities as soldiers. There are no female Jem'Hadar in canon because they literally weren't meant to exist. So when Starfleet Academy introduces not just a female Jem'Hadar, but one who's also half Klingon and in a same relationship, fans saw it as the writers completely ignoring established universe rules just to check diversity boxes. Gold Derby even published a description that highlighted how Yashere is making franchise history as the first openly black actress playing an openly character who's also the franchise's first female-presenting part Klingon, part Jem'Hadar character in a lesbian relationship. That's a lot of firsts crammed into one character, and it felt less like organic storytelling and more like someone going down a checklist of representation categories. Accusations of bad writing started flooding in immediately, and fans pointed out scenes where the captain orders full power to forward shields while the ship is clearly being attacked from behind. That's the kind of continuity error that makes you wonder if the writers and the production team are even communicating with each other. Others called out the dialogue as sounding like it was written by someone who's never actually watched Star Trek. And one reviewer said the humor feels like clueless adults desperately trying to appeal to a younger crowd, with forced Gen Z TikTok slang that feels completely out of place in the Trek universe. Characters use modern profanity that previous Star Trek series carefully avoided, breaking the immersive quality that made those shows special. And the tone is all over the place, trying to be a serious drama one minute and a zany comedy the next, like it can't decide if it wants to be Deep Space Nine or a DW teen soap opera. Gina Yashere decided to enter the chat in the most explosive way possible right around this time. Instead of addressing any of the actual criticisms about writing quality or lore consistency, she went straight to Instagram with a series of posts that basically poured gasoline on an already raging fire. She shared a clip from Bill Maher's show that touched on the controversy, and in her caption she wrote something that immediately went viral for all the wrong reasons. All of the hatred coming at us is from fragile, angry white men talking about either our non-whiteness or our bodies. It's frankly ridiculous, and it makes me want to lean even more into our wokeness. Fans are complaining about bad dialogue, inconsistent writing, characters acting unprofessionally, and fundamental violations of established lore. And her response is to claim it's all coming from fragile, angry white men upset about diversity. She's dismissing every single piece of criticism as racism and without addressing whether any of it might be valid. And it's the exact kind of response that makes people even angrier, because it feels like she's hiding behind identity labels instead of acknowledging legitimate quality concerns. She didn't stop there either, because in another post she leaned into the woke label with almost aggressive enthusiasm and wrote, "We woke as hell over here. So woke. Incredible woke. Woker than woke. Wokey woke woke. A of woke." This is someone actively taunting her critics and making it clear she has zero interest in their feedback. She called herself a space lesbian multiple times and added phrases like wokey wokey, super woke, wokest of the woke. And it reads less like a thoughtful defense of the show and more like someone who knows they're in a losing battle and has decided to go down swinging. The problem is that when you're part of a show that's already struggling in the ratings and hemorrhaging viewers, publicly antagonizing your potential audience is a spectacularly bad strategy, because you're basically telling people who might have given the show a chance that their concerns don't matter, and they're terrible people for having them. Then came the Bill Maher situation, which somehow made everything even more chaotic. Maher did a segment on his show where he joked about Star Trek, Starfleet Academy, and one of his comments was about the cast not fitting his idea of what space lesbians should look like. Maher's humor is deliberately provocative, and people who watch his show know he's going to push buttons. But Yasher took the bait and responded with a comment that showed just how personal this whole thing had become for her. She wrote, "At Bill Maher is nobody's fantasy either, so we're even my dude," which is a pretty savage comeback. But it also reveals something important about where her head is at. She's in full combat mode, firing back at anyone who criticizes it regardless of whether they're making valid points or just making jokes. And when you're at that level of defensiveness, it usually means you know on some level that the criticism is hitting close to home. The pattern that emerged from all these responses was telling, because Yashere kept insisting that Star Trek has been woke from day one, which technically isn't wrong. The original series featured the first interracial controversial kiss on American television. It had a diverse bridge crew during the height of the civil rights movement, and it presented a utopian future where humanity had moved beyond prejudice and conflict. Here's the critical difference that Yasher and the show's defenders keep missing the show. Those earlier Star Trek series were well written. They told compelling stories with complex characters and thought-provoking moral dilemmas, and the diversity was part of the world building, not the entire point of the show. When fans complain about Starfleet Academy being too woke, most of them aren't actually complaining about diverse casting. They're complaining that the show seems more interested in making statements than telling good stories, and they're frustrated that characters feel like diversity checkboxes rather than fully realized people with meaningful arcs and motivations. Multiple reviewers describe the show as having the worst dialogue in the entire franchise, which is saying something for a series that's been on TV for 60 years. The jokes reportedly land like lead weights, the character motivations are paper thin, and the conflicts feel manufactured rather than earned. And one particularly scathing review said the show feels like it was designed by a committee that has never seen an episode of The Next Generation and treats Starfleet discipline like a joke. Physical fitness standards are roasted, authority figures act like children, and the entire atmosphere that made Starfleet feel like a prestigious institution has been stripped away. So instead of inspiring young officers working towards something greater than themselves, we get what critics describe as whiny kids and cartoonish characters running around a spaceship with no sense of purpose or professionalism. The writing problems are impossible to ignore once you start looking at what viewers are actually saying. User reviews on IMDb and Metacritic paint a devastating picture, with one reviewer writing, "This abomination was so offensively bad it made me physically ill. It is an insult to the franchise, the fans, and the intelligence of anyone who ever believed in what Star Trek stood for." Another said, "Actors who can't act, dialogue written by a 14-year-old, humor out of place. This is a disgrace to Star Trek. It's a burning dumpster fire." They're part of a massive chorus of longtime fans saying the same things over and over. The dialogue feels amateurish, the characters are unlikable, the tone is inconsistent, the lore is being violated left and right, and the show feels like it was made by people who've done no research into Star Trek and don't understand what made the franchise work for 60 years. Even some of the more balanced reviews acknowledge serious problems exist. One critic who gave the show a middling score said the student characters are overly familiar collegiate archetypes, and the show struggles to balance serious Federation concerns with teenage drama, while another mentioned that whenever characters spend too much time explaining complicated scientific concepts or deep-cut Trek lore, it becomes easy to check out mentally because the delivery is so clunky. The show is apparently trying to be multiple things at once: the dark gravitas of Deep Space Nine, the zany humor of Lower Decks, the hopeful optimism of The Next Generation, and a coming-of-age teen drama, and in trying to be everything it ends up being nothing. You get a muddled mess without a clear identity or consistent tone, lurching from scene to scene without any sense of what it's actually trying to say or who it's trying to reach. One particularly damaging review described Holly Hunter's character as projecting neither confidence nor wisdom, making her performance feel like an attempt to mark territory that never quite lands. The reviewer said watching her in the captain's chair doesn't evoke the nobility of Picard or the determined grit of Sisko. Instead, it feels awkward and unconvincing, like the writers want her to be a whimsical, free spirit. But that doesn't work for someone who's supposed to be commanding a starship and training the next generation of Starfleet officers. You don't want Ms. Frizzle from the Magic School Bus squaring off against Romulans. You need someone who feels like they've earned their rank through experience and competence. And according to many viewers, Hunter's character simply doesn't convey that, which isn't necessarily her fault if the writing doesn't support it. The show's 5th episode aired on February 5th and focused on a character named Sam, attempting to tackle the mystery of what happened to Captain Benjamin Sisko from Deep Space Nine. This was clearly designed as a love letter to longtime fans, complete with callbacks to DS9 and even a voice cameo from Avery Brooks, and some reviewers praised this episode as heartfelt and emotionally resonant, a sign that Starfleet Academy might be capable of good storytelling when it focuses. Even this episode couldn't escape criticism, though, because one review called it pitched too young with excessive on-screen graphics and text overlays that felt patronizing, and another gave it only 3 out of 5 stars despite acknowledging the DS9 tribute worked. Plenty of viewers pointed out that one decent episode out of 5 doesn't erase the fundamental problems with characterization, dialogue, and tone that plague the rest of the series. Here's where things get really messy. Because the show was renewed for a second season before the first episode even premiered, Paramount greenlit another season without seeing how audiences would react, without knowing if anyone would actually watch, and without waiting to see if the quality would justify continued investment. This raises all kinds of questions about whether the renewal was based on internal metrics that suggested the show would be a hit, whether it was a decision to show commitment to diverse storytelling regardless of reception, or whether Paramount simply had so much money invested that they couldn't afford to pull the plug before giving it a real chance. Whatever Whatever the reason, it means the show is coming back no matter how badly it's performing right now, which removes any incentive for the writers to address fan concerns or improve the quality. This pattern isn't unique to Starfleet Academy at all. Disney's Star Wars: The Acolyte faced similar backlash after its creators described it as the installment in the franchise. Netflix's Stranger Things got review bombed when a main character came out as gay in the final season. And in every case, the response from creators and cast members followed the same playbook. Dismiss criticism as accuse fans of review bombing, lean harder into the controversial elements to show you won't be intimidated, and refuse to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, some of the criticism is actually about quality rather than ideological opposition. It's a defensive strategy that might feel satisfying in the moment, but it alienates the very people you need to watch your show if you want it to succeed. Yasher appeared on CNN to double down on her position and said, "Woke is a good word. It's been given negative connotations, but woke just means you're awake and aware of everything that's going on in the world around you." Not technically wrong, but she's deliberately missing the point. When people criticize a show for being woke, they're criticizing the heavy-handed way those themes are presented, the sacrifice of story quality for message delivery, and the assumption that representation alone makes something good regardless of execution. You can have the most diverse cast in television history, but if the writing is terrible and the characters are shallow, people aren't going to watch, and they're definitely not going to appreciate being called when they point out those flaws. The term review bombing gets thrown around constantly now, and it's become a convenient way to dismiss any negative audience reaction. Review bombing is supposed to refer to organized campaigns where people who haven't watched something flood it with negative reviews for ideological reasons, and that definitely happens sometimes. But here's the thing. When you have over 15,000 people rating your show poorly on IMDb, when your audience score is less than half your critic score, when you're losing in the streaming charts to shows that ended decades ago, at what point do you have to admit that maybe people just don't like what you made? At what point does review bombing become a cop-out excuse that prevents you from honestly evaluating where you went wrong? Some critics have started questioning whether professional reviewers are grading Starfleet Academy on a curve because of its progressive themes. One outlet asked directly whether critics are giving the show high marks because they want to support its diverse casting and messaging. And the article pointed out that this creates an unhealthy dynamic where audiences can't trust reviews anymore, and creators get insulated from legitimate feedback that could help them improve. When positive reviews feel uncritical to the point of absurdity, and negative reactions get dismissed as bad faith, you end up in a place where no honest conversation about quality can happen. And that hurts everyone, including the people who genuinely want to see more diverse storytelling in science fiction. Yasher's aggressive responses suggest she knows the show is in trouble but doesn't want to admit it. When you're winning, you don't need to get defensive. And when your show is a genuine hit that people love, you can afford to be gracious toward critics because their complaints look petty and irrelevant in the face of your success. When you're losing in every measurable way, though, ratings, audience scores, streaming charts, social media sentiment, and you respond by calling your critics fragile and angry, you're essentially admitting you don't have a real defense. You're hoping that by making it about identity and viewpoint, you can avoid talking about the actual quality of the work. And that strategy might work with some people, but it's not going to bring back viewers who tried the show and didn't like it. And it's not going to convince Star Trek fans who feel betrayed by what they see as a fundamental misunderstanding of what made the franchise great. The comparison to shows like Everybody Loves Raymond beating Starfleet Academy in the streaming charts is particularly telling. They're choosing it because it's funny, comfortable, and well-written, and they know what they're getting, and they know it'll deliver. With Starfleet Academy, they tried it, didn't enjoy it, and moved on to something else. And that's not an ideological statement. That's just how television works. If you don't give people a reason to keep watching, they won't. And no amount of calling them names on Instagram is going to change that basic reality. The really tragic part of all this is that there's nothing inherently wrong with wanting to tell diverse stories or explore progressive themes in Star Trek, because the franchise has always done that. The franchise has done it well when the writing is sharp, the characters are compelling, and the stories have something meaningful to say beyond just diversity good, bad. Deep Space Nine dealt with religion, war, terrorism, and moral compromise in ways that challenged viewers and sparked genuine debate. The Next Generation tackled difficult ethical questions about personhood, justice, and the responsibility of power. And Voyager showed a crew struggling to survive while maintaining their principles in impossible circumstances. These shows worked because they respected their audience's intelligence and didn't talk down to them. They presented complex situations without easy answers and trusted viewers to think for themselves. Starfleet Academy doesn't do any of that based on everything everything we're hearing from viewers. It presents characters who feel like archetypes rather than people. It delivers dialogue that sounds like it was written by people who've never had a real conversation. It violates established lore without providing compelling reasons why those changes serve the story. And it treats Starfleet like a joke instead of an institution worth aspiring to. When fans point all this out, they get told they're just mad about diversity. It's insulting because it assumes that anyone who doesn't like the show must be motivated by prejudice, which is a serious accusation to throw at people who've been watching and loving Star Trek's diverse casts for literally decades. 5 episodes into the season, the situation hasn't improved at all. The ratings continue to disappoint. The social media discourse remains overwhelmingly negative outside of a small group of defenders, and the show's stars are at war with portions of the fan base, which creates an unhealthy environment that makes casual viewers even less likely to give it a chance. Meanwhile, Paramount has already committed to a second season, which means we're going to get more of this regardless of how badly the first season performs. The question now isn't whether Starfleet Academy will be canceled. It won't be, at least not immediately. The question is whether the people making it will take any of the criticism to heart and try to improve, or whether they'll double down on the elements that aren't working and blame the audience for not appreciating their vision. Yashere's outburst might have actually made things worse for the show's long-term prospects. By turning this into a culture war battle, she's ensured that a lot of people will never give Starfleet Academy a fair chance, even if it does improve, because they'll see it as that show where the actress called them fragile and angry, and they'll decide they have better things to do with their time. People who do watch out of ideological solidarity might stick around for a while, but if the quality doesn't improve, even they'll eventually drift away, because you can only coast on good intentions for so long before you actually have to deliver something worth watching. So far, the evidence suggests Starfleet Academy isn't doing that for most people who try it. The deeper issue here goes beyond just one show or one actress losing her cool on social media. You're looking at an industry that's become terrified of honest feedback, at creators who seem more interested in making statements than making good art, at a critical establishment that's lost credibility because audiences suspect they're grading based on viewpoint rather than quality, and at fans who feel like they're being told their opinions don't matter unless they agree with everything they're being given. That's an unhealthy dynamic for everyone involved, because good art requires honest criticism. It requires creators who can separate legitimate feedback from bad faith attacks, and it requires audiences who feel like their voices are actually being heard rather than dismissed as whenever they express disappointment. Star Trek used to be about bringing people together around a shared vision of a better future. It was about showing that humanity could overcome its divisions and work towards something greater. But Starfleet Academy has become a symbol of division, with people fighting about what the show represents rather than discussing whether it's actually any good. When Gina Yashere responds to criticism by attacking her audience and doubling down on the exact things they're complaining about, she's contributing to that division, and she's making it harder for people to have nuanced conversations about diversity and storytelling, about what Star Trek should be in 2026, and about how to balance creative vision with audience expectations. The real tragedy is that this didn't have to be this way at all. Paramount could have made a show about a diverse group of Starfleet cadets that honored the franchise's legacy while bringing something new to the table. They could have written compelling characters who happen to be diverse, rather than characters whose entire identity revolves around their diversity. They could have created conflicts that felt earned, and resolutions that felt satisfying, and they could have delivered dialogue that sounds like something actual humans would say instead of awkward attempts to sound cool or relevant. They had all the resources, all the talent, and all the goodwill from a fan base that genuinely wanted a new Star Trek show to succeed, and somehow they squandered it. What we're left with now is a show that's dividing fans, tanking in the ratings, and generating more negative press than positive. You've got an actress who's gone to war with her audience and shows no signs of backing down, a second season guaranteed to happen regardless of how poorly the first one performs, and a fan base that's more fractured and bitter than it's been in years. Whether you think the criticism of Starfleet Academy is fair or whether you believe it's being unfairly attacked, one thing is undeniable, and that's that this is not how you build a successful television series. This is how you burn bridges, alienate viewers, and ensure that even people who might have enjoyed your show will avoid it just to stay out of the drama. The question hanging over all of this is whether defending poor quality work actually hurts the causes it claims to support. When you take a show with legitimate problems and turn any criticism into evidence of you make it harder for genuinely good, diverse storytelling to get the recognition it deserves. You teach audiences to be suspicious of progressive themes because they've learned those themes might be used as shields against honest evaluation. And you create an environment where people feel like they have to choose between supporting diversity and acknowledging quality, when those things shouldn't be in conflict at all. You give ammunition to people who want to argue that Hollywood cares more about ideology than craftsmanship, which isn't a message anyone who actually wants to see more diverse stories should be sending. Gina Yashere might might think she's bravely standing up to unreasonable fans, but what she's really doing is making it easier for people to dismiss legitimate criticism and harder for the show to course correct if it wants to survive beyond its guaranteed second season. She's putting herself and her castmates in an impossible position where they're expected to defend a show that many viewers simply don't think is very good, using arguments that don't actually address the core complaints. And she's contributing to a broader cultural conversation where viewpoint has become so entangled with entertainment that we can't have honest discussions about quality anymore without everything turning into a screaming match about values and representation. The future of Star Trek, Starfleet Academy remains uncertain despite its second season renewal, because shows get canceled after multiple seasons all the time if they can't find an audience. If season 2 continues to perform poorly, if the negative word of mouth keeps spreading, if the social media discourse remains problematic, Paramount will eventually have to make a decision about whether continuing the show is worth the controversy and the investment. Yasher and the other cast members might want to consider whether their current strategy of attacking critics and doubling down on divisiveness is actually helping their show or hastening its eventual demise. Because right now they're not winning anyone over. They're just making sure that the people who already don't like the show will never give it another chance. And the people who might have been on the fence will probably just decide to watch something else instead. The lesson here should be obvious, but somehow it keeps getting ignored. Make good television and people will watch it, regardless of how diverse the cast is or how progressive the themes are. Make bad television and try to hide behind ideology, and people will see right through it. Respect your audience's intelligence, and they'll give you a chance to tell your story, but treat them like for not liking what you made, and they'll walk away and never come back. Star Trek, Starfleet Academy had every opportunity to be something special, and somewhere along the way it lost the plot. And Gina Yasher's explosive response to the backlash just might be the final nail in the coffin for a show that was already struggling to survive.